We'll understand now today what is an API documentation and why do we need it. At least we have referred it quite a lot of time till now. You might be having an idea, but no, to give you a little bit more on this topic. So let's see this document and see how it is structured basically, right? So here, since they have hosted this, API Swagger specification file. See, API documentation. If you are using Swagger, then that is maybe a JSON file or YML file format, and you need to host it somewhere, so that we can use this document. So how to create that specification, right? So somebody has to create that specification. So one way is, your developer can create that specification from the code itself. No, if they are using something like Spring Boot, right? So it has a support to enable API documentation. Okay, so once they enable their code with those annotations, so the documentation will be auto generated when you deploy your code. So they can give you one port URL port, and where you can see your internal API documentation. So in case you are using some third party applications and they already have a documentation like this, so they will give you this particular JSON file. If you see here the link, right, there is a JSON. If you see here, this is a JSON file. This is the specification, raw specification file. So Swagger will actually parse that file and it will give you in a UI format, but the main specification will be in JSON format like this. Okay, so you can see the Open API, what is the version, title, then path. Basically, path means your endpoints, right? So then it will give you all the details about the different endpoints. Basically, what is the structure, what is the body parameter, query parameters, right? So everything you can document using this format. So you can use your own JSON. Suppose you have this JSON file, right? You can, there is something called Swagger editor. Okay. If you go to this editor, now suppose you have a JSON file of your own, right? So here you can actually import the file and you can see the result. Suppose you got that JSON file from your development team. I mean, some team, they have created some APIs and they want you to test it. So you should always question, do you have a Swagger file? If they have Swagger file, it will be easy for you to test it, right, to write your scenarios. So if they give a Swagger file, what you can do, this Swagger editor you can import that file and you can see the things. And suppose you are modifying something here, that will get reflected. And Swagger editor, you can see this is again online, right? So if you see like a risk, okay, your APIs are secured and you don't want to expose your file to online Swagger editor. So Swagger provides this complete code in GitHub. This is a node package basically, so you have to install it and then you can actually deploy the Swagger in your local machine. Okay, similar way, this complete thing is deployable to your local machine and you can host the same thing in your local machine. In case you don't want to use something online because of security purpose, so you can always go back to your own version of it. This thing, right? So you can generate it from the code. Mostly developer will not manually create it. Okay, so they will how lazy the developers is, right? So we are also testers, also we are very lazy, so they are more lazier than us. So why they will create it manually? So what they will do, they will add it to their code only. The annotations and all, they will add it to their code. Description and all they have to add, but other things it will be auto populated. You are not using, your development team is not using Swagger. Assume that, right? You don't have this. that is also possible to manually create this specification. I mean, I have created it myself. So Swagger also provide tool chains to create this basically. No, you can specify the endpoints, okay, whatever endpoints you want, but you have to give the in a format like this is the endpoint name, description, all those things are there. There's a similar format you have to give, and all your parameters you have to define. Basically, you are designing your no APIs, right? So you are designing, you know your specification, you know that you have a user no user entity which should take name, ID, maybe phone number, all those things, and each field what is the specification, right? So you can create it, and using Swagger toolchain you can generate this kind of file like YML or JSON file, but you have to use Swagger this one for this thing, Swagger toolkits basically.
Oh, okay.
See here, see paths find by tag, right? So this is the endpoint. Now this is a get. So all the information are here, like what are the parameters, what it produces, what is the operation ID. Operation ID is nothing but that method, right? So find paths by tag. So in your code, you might be having this method from where the operation ID is coming, right? So in your code, this will come, this will be there. Then no, something is required parameter, something is optional parameter, right? Then what is the response you are expecting? 200 and 400 for invalid tag value. What is the security, right? So all those things you can define here. Either you generate or you create, but you need this file basically to generate the documentation. What exactly you have to do? See, suppose you have agreed to change, right? So you are agreed to change your contract basically. Okay, so initially when the contract was there, you as a tester, you started writing your script. Maybe you have mocked your var mock and whatever it is, right? You can do that. Now, since developer is working on it and client wanted something else, so they will change their code, right? Once they change their code, basically the documentation also will change. Now, depending on which version of Swagger you are actually using to write your test. Now, documentation will come into picture. No changes will visible to you only they deploy it, right? So they may not do an internal deployment, right? So mostly how they will do, they before when it comes to testing only they will deploy it. But you can always check with your developer, because you will be having the code access,
Okay.
right? So if they have already updated it, you can take a code from the branch and you can update your files. Another option here is like in Postman, you can import your Swagger file. You can see here based on this JSON file, right? So you can see the endpoints listed here. So everything is coming from that raw JSON file. Your this is activities, then authors, right? Books, cover photos, right? So if you go to, for example, Git, so whatever they have added for activities, right? So let's see, search for activities in the here. You can see here, this is the tag activities, right? So we have seen activities here, and we have first one is get, and then the responses, the schema, right? So everything is defined here for activity. So you can correlate with whatever is coming from here in the document. So get activity, then what is the response will look like, right? So 200 success, media, what is the media type, right? And suppose you want to try it out, it is the best option here. You want to try this, now when you can try it, basically if your code and the Swagger document is deployed in the same location, it is pointing to the same server, right? Otherwise you will not be able to try it basically. And when you deploy your local Swagger documentation, right? So your code and the Swagger documentation will go into the same server where it is running. And then if it is pointing to the server, then you should be able to execute from the document only. If you execute, you can see the response here. Like, it will say, it will show you what are the responses coming from the server. Response code 200, and you can play around with all these APIs. So this is where if they are using Swagger, you will get this kind of documentation. Otherwise, if any other methods they are using, for example, Spotify, right? So I showed you Spotify. This also provides a way to run from the console only. Okay, so if you see here, albums, suppose I want to get albums. If you give the ID, right, and the token is already there, you can try it out. The token is expired, it is telling. You can maybe playlist. Agree. Try it out. Yeah. See here. You can try it out from the console only. This is also kind of documentation, right? So this is running in their server, their sandbox, right? So they have given us this environment, and we are able to try couple of from here directly. API documentation actually gives you basically the contract, right? So here also, if you see here, what does the response should look like, what does the request should look like, right? This is my contract. If I'm creating a post request and I am actually expecting for parameters with so and so data type, right? So that is my contract. Now the Spotify has given us this particular URL endpoint, and it is telling you send this request with so and so parameters. Now if I try to send with some other parameter, no, it will not work basically. And Spotify also, since Spotify has given us that API, right? So if they are changing the contract, for example, the country code, right? So they are removing the country code from that API, then they should intimate the clients basically, and update the documentation and tell them like, hey, we are changing the contract, and if you are integrating with our solution or our APIs, you have to also change your consumer structure, basically how you are consuming it. So that is the main reason why we do contract testing, basically. When we try to connect with third-party APIs, contract testing is very, very important. Okay. If contracts are broken, means your your code will broke. If you are integrated, you are using already Spotify APIs in your application, in your mobile or web application, and contract is broken, then obviously your code will break. Your code will break means your test also will break, right? So there should be some mechanism to find out, there are contracts changes. So that's why we do contract testing, so that we can make necessary changes. So if you are using third-party APIs, they should notify you well ahead, like we are changing these APIs. These are the changes, parameters. Suppose number, phone number was before string, now they change it to number. Data type. So those kind of things has to be notified to the consuming clients, basically. So yeah, so coming back to the documentation, yeah, this is how the documentation look like. For example, here, see, this particular URL, it needs a ID, basically, right? So if you try it out, then it will allow you to give the ID. If ID is matching, then you should get a response. If I give some ID, maybe it will not match. See, it is returning empty. That means that book is not there. Okay, so documentation mainly, trying things. It helps in trying the APIs beforehand. Suppose you want to purchase Spotify APIs. So before purchasing, obviously you want to try out, right? So whether it works, whether it fulfills your requirements, that you can do no by trying. So that API documentation will help. You can also show this kind of documentation to the client. They can try it out, the basic things from the document itself. So that will help you also them to get a feel of the APIs before when it is actually under development. We can maybe mock out and responses, just you can feed out the responses from a mock server instead of the real one. Show the demo to the client, tell them like, okay, this how it looks like when the complete when we complete the actual implementation. So that will increase their confidence level, right? So documentation has lot of benefits. Even when you give it to some other team, they can that will help them to understand about what those APIs are doing, how they can integrate to their code. So lot of benefits, and very very important concept in APIs. I think that's all now about documentation. You can always refer to this